This is Maiku, and you are listening to the Narrow Path and the Floating Mountains podcast. This is a podcast that is dedicated to stories and tellings of my spiritual experiences and its relationship with mental health. Some of the stories I will be sharing will cover many topics such as the parallels in spirituality and mental health, ghost stories, dreams, tarot reading, mediumship, and more. I do want to provide a disclaimer that I do not have any certification in spiritual healing, mental health therapy, nor do I have an altar to practice Hmong shamanistic healing or rituals. Many of the stories I will be sharing are based purely on my personal experiences and how I have made sense of them throughout the years. So to those who are listening to this podcast, I hope that you will enjoy my stories and join me on the narrow path in the floating mountains.
She calls me day and night. I'm sorry, girl, you just don't make me feel right.
For this episode, as I promised in the last episode, I will be talking about spirit guides and your spiritual team. I did record this again, but it didn't get deleted this time. I just thought that there was one part of the episode that I focused too much on one particular type of guide. But I do feel like it deserves its own episode, and so again, take this episode as a very basic, very general 101 on spirit guides and spirit team. And so without further ado, I will jump right into it. Some of the definitions that I will be bringing up, they are from websites, because I realized that when I was trying to talk about them, I really didn't have the words to talk about them. I mostly just feel my spiritual team, and it's a little bit hard for me to explain. And so I will be referencing from different websites, and in that process, then maybe I can go into it a little bit more about my personal experiences with the different guides, but I will talk about the different types of guides that you can have as well. And I did mention, so you're probably already familiar with what guides are if you've been listening to the podcast. I mentioned it in my When I Was a Child episode, so I think it was like the second episode, where I talked about spirit guides. I briefly talked about it. But in this one, you get the whole thing. So I'll stop blabbing. So my first thing that I wanted to talk about is, what is your spiritual team? For some of you, this is probably the first time. This may be the first time that you've even heard of what a spiritual team is, or what spirit guides are. But I feel that for people who are listening to this, they have a general idea. But essentially, and according to medium.com, your spiritual team comprises of external energies that give us information and guidance. So they're the ones that are sending us spiritual messages. They're the ones that are helping us to connect with the spiritual world, helping us navigate. They're like our assistants. Sometimes they can also act as our guides. They're the ones that are telling us, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, So that's what your spiritual team is. You have a whole team that has a certain role to guide you on your journey. Your spiritual team can be made up of a number of entities or energies called spirit guides, and they all work together no matter the cultural origin. And that's also speaking from my personal experience too. They all just kind of work together. There are some guides that come through more strongly than others, but for the most part, say like if I can't connect to one type of information, it could come. One of the things that can come through is like one particular guide that I've been connecting with that can then connect me to like another type of guide. So it's kind of like telephone. That's the only way I can explain like connecting to messages with different guides or different spiritual entities or spiritual beings. They are so, then who are these spiritual guides, right? Who are these spirit guides? They are entities that do not reincarnate or does not pass over to be reborn and act as a guide or a protector for us in the spiritual world. So they could be people who once were living and they were members of somebody else's family that you have never even met. They could be spiritual entities or beings from a different time, and they have a specific task of working with you to help you navigate your spiritual journey. And so they don't reincarnate. They decide that they're not going to reincarnate. They're like, nope, I actually really like my role here. I think this is what I'm supposed to do, is be a spiritual guide to help others. And they stick around. They just stick around and they help people, humans, work through whatever it is that they're working through. And I do want to say, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be guides or beings from our world. It could even be beings from celestial realm. It could even be beings from other star systems. And within each category, I could have a whole episode about them. And I think that's what I want to do, because I just cannot put them all in like one episode. Because if I do, it'll probably end up being like a 5-hour episode. And I'm trying to work really hard on my time. But, right, so, that is the general or the basic definition, a basic definition of what a spirit guide is. And they can also be animals too. So now that we have an idea of what a spiritual guide is, then who can be a spirit guide? I mentioned that, it could be someone's ancestor who comes to you and just is like, oh yeah, I'm here to help you, I have a very interesting story about the instructor of the Psychic 101 class. She had a guide who she called Dusty, and how she knew she was working with Dusty was like when she would pick her outfit intuitively, and if she noticed that she looked like a cowboy, then she knew it was Dusty, because for her, Dusty was from the cowboy time, like pioneering times, and he was the one that she would connect with. And so the day of the workshop, she dressed up as like, she had like elements, she had like this huge like brown poncho, and she was like, well, Dusty's with us here today, it was kind of cool. Actually, I really like, so unrelated, I really like going to these like workshops because you can just talk about spirituality and not feel judged, or not feel like somebody is not make someone feel like they're completely out of the loop. Like, you just talk about things and you're like, oh yeah, you talk about spirits and talking to them, and for a lot of people it really weirds them out. And so it was just really cool. So at these workshops, it's kind of cool to like attend them, because then you meet people who are like-minded and talk to spirits on a daily basis. So back to who can be a spirit guide. So I want to first start off with archangels. I mentioned that sometimes I connect with archangels to do protection work, specifically with Archangel Michael. And there are many, many archangels, but there are 6 that are commonly called upon. And for some of you who are familiar, you might be familiar with Archangel Michael, but there's also Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Uriel, Archangel Raphael, then there's Metatron and Sandalphon. And all of them rule different directions. Metatron rules the from above and Sandalphon rules from below, like the earth plane. And I go to them when I'm feeling like I need guidance. I call upon them, and most specifically with Archangel Michael. And I have an interesting story with Archangel Michael too. So when I was deciding to pick, deciding to like figure out what school to send my son to, I noticed that this school was literally next door to a local church called St. Michael's. And I don't know what it was. I was just like, I really feel like this is a school and I'm going to work really hard to try and get in. And the thing was that it was lottery based. Admission is lottery based. And I actually was looking for Montessori schools, and that was the one school that came up that was free. There are other public Montessori schools, but for the most part, many of them are either tuition based or it's lottery based. But I really liked the school because they were located in a very low income neighborhood, and the student body was very diverse, and the guides and the teachers and the staff were just really you could just tell like they were really looking out for the families. And so we went in, did a walkthrough. The family coordinator really was hopeful about Sage's integration into the school environment, or even the curriculum and the philosophy. And so I like worked my butt to get all the paperwork in, and I like prayed, when it came time to when it came time for them to draw names, I prayed, and I was like, Saint Michael, like Archangel Michael, if like I pray for like your protection, and I pray for you to clear any blockages from my son or my path that might hinder him from getting into the school. I know that you'll protect him, and just basically like asking for his protection and ask for him to clear any blockages. And it was a little bit of time. It took about a month or two before we got any emails that told us about the results of the lottery, and my son got admitted. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it was one of those like, spirituality is like real. Like asking for help from higher power is real. Like asking help from your guides is real. And so I highly recommend archangels. I recommend archangels for many, many people, especially people who I know who are who go to church or have a Christian faith. That and I know for some people, for some Christian churches too, or for some churches, they don't really they aren't even really open to the idea of angels. But that's the only thing that I can advise for people who I know who go to church, because it's really worked for me. And the energy, all the archangels work through Christ energy. How can I say it? They each all have a different ray and fire that you can channel or you can embody to call upon them to. And it's all connected to like God. I shouldn't say Christ, God. And so I'm not one that believes in like God as one source, as one like being. My perspective on that is that there is a source. I don't know what that looks like, but it comes in many different forms, and there are also other beings that are working with source, and that this source is actually all connected to everyone, but it's not like a person. What is it? It's not symbolic of a person, if that makes sense. But anyways, I work with archangels. Archangels can be a guide, and they're more so there for like the outer work, the work of bringing you information that helps you in the night of a dark soul, dark soul of the night, or dark night of the soul moments. I refer to that a lot because I've gone through it, and it's another way of me just saying like when I'm having a crisis situation. So archangels are really good for crisis situations when you finally have time to single out what is it that is bothering you, or that you need to work on something and you don't know what it is. Calling on archangels also really helps. But the next thing is, what other type of guides, who can be a guide? And there can be animal guides. So animal guides are also referred to as spirit animals. And spirit animals can be pets that you once had, or animals that you resonate with to teach you a lesson or show you a message. They can even show up in the physical as you are traveling, or in your backyard. Something as like random as like your backyard. I live in the city, and so sometimes seeing wild animals in the city is really jarring, right? I remember some of the stranger sightings foxes are pretty typical. They're not typical, but it makes sense that they would be seen in the city. But there was one time I saw a fox, and it was in broad daylight. There was one time, it was really crazy. There was a pig, and there was like another animal that was just literally crossing the street. I think it was a pig and a dog. They were like crossing the street. Another time there was coyotes. Coyotes are pretty common, but there weren't really any sightings in the city only until recently. And then deers are pretty common, and of course like hawks. And I do feel like people take for granted birds of prey. They're very elusive though, but once my husband started pointing out like that in our neighborhood there was this Cooper's hawk, that I started noticing them more. And Cooper's hawk, coming to learn more about them, are pretty amazing. But wild animals, sometimes they can come in the form of just little trinkets that you find, or little charms. You could ask for like, a whale, and then next thing you know, like you don't see it, but there's like a huge billboard. Like it's not a physical whale, but you see a huge billboard of like a blue whale or something. So again, spirit guides, animals don't necessarily come in physical form. They come in symbolic form too. Or maybe you ask for the sign and you walk into your doctor's office and they have a calendar of like whales, and you remember what you had asked for, and you see the calendar and you think like, oh my gosh, that's just a coincidence. But no, take it as a sign from the spirit animal that is being made aware to you that whatever you are thinking at that moment, or wherever you are, that it's confirmation, so that's the only way that spirit animals can come up. And I guess that can be said about all the guides that I'm mentioning today, the different types of guides that I'm mentioning today. They can come up in the most like uncommon places, so when you are thinking about receiving signs from any particular guide that it can it doesn't have to be literal. It can be just, you know, it can be metaphorical, like even in conversation. So the next thing then, and then I also want to mention that it can be pets coming to you in dreams. We have 2 dogs that have passed. One being my husband's dog when we were still dating, but we had one together, and she passed because of cancer. It escalated really quickly, and we decided to put her down because her health was just declining. And so it got to a stage 4 cancer, and the doctor said it wasn't going to be likely that she could recover from it. And so I just didn't want to put her through that, and I talked to my husband about it, and he and I both agreed. But she still comes around, and her energy is still the same. She comes through my dreams, and sometimes when I am receiving a lot of dog signs, it's also related to the current dog that we have, who has she has seizures. So she has seizures when she has low blood sugar, and sometimes when I am receiving a lot of dog signs, it's indicating to me that, oh, she's gonna have a seizure pretty soon, so we have to take care of her, and we have to like try to help her balance her blood sugar blood level. And so that happened recently, where she hadn't had a seizure in a really, really long time, and I kept getting like dog signs from my clients. Like they would talk about their dogs, or I kept having clients book like back to back, and they were all talking about their dogs, and we would just have conversation about our dogs. And it would come up about volunteering to help at the Humane Society. And so this idea of just trying to be a helper, for a caretaker for animals, and made me think like, okay, caretaker animals, like I think this means like I have to like pay attention to, you know, our dog. And sure enough, like a few days later, like she was fine. One thing that we did overlook though was that whenever she was laying in her kennel a lot, so we leave her kennel open because sometimes, I think this is just due to how she was brought up, she just feels really comfortable in her kennel, and so she has like a bed out in the living room, but I think it's kind of like a safe space for her, because it's enclosed, that she would just sleep in her kennel all day and wouldn't come out to eat. And so we had noticed that, but she would come out when we were out, but she was always in her kennel throughout the day. And you know, when I was receiving those signs a few days later, she had a seizure, and it was a really long seizure. Sometimes her seizures only last like 15 minutes, and then we give her medicine, and then she recovers from it. But this one was like long. It was like it was nearly like an hour, and it happened at midnight. And if I hadn't heard her struggling in her kennel, because she sleeps in her kennel at night, she would have been going through that by herself. And so with everything that was like building up to that point, I was like, I heard it, and I told my husband, and I'm like, we have to go check on her. I don't feel good about this. And we went, and she was going through her seizure, and we just kind of stayed with her, and we gave her medicine. The doctor told us that if your dog has low blood sugar and they are prone to seizures, that it could be their blood sugar level. And so they told us we can give her Caro syrup, to help her blood sugar level get back up. And so how we maintain it is sometimes we give her apples too, and then we also noticed that her blood sugar level would drop if the night was really chilly, and so we ended up putting like a little space heater by her kennel just so that she could stay warm at night. And I realized that that would happen with my son too, so we kind of were like, oh, okay, we get it, how having a low blood sugar level can also, or not, your body not being able to regulate that could also be very harmful. And we don't know what her genealogy is. We don't know like what her parents had, but when we got her, she was already 2, and her first epilepsy or her first seizure was maybe like 2 or 3 months into like us having her. And I freaked out because I just didn't know. I've never seen a dog have a seizure before, and I freaked out, and yeah. And the crazy thing is, like, before that, the dog that me and my husband had together that had cancer, she was deaf. She was completely deaf, and so just having like another special needs dog, and then taking in another special needs dog, I kind of feel like that was just inevitable for the both of us, and maybe that's what our path is. But yeah, we have, well, I know for me, I have a lot of animal spirit guides, but I never really connected with them, only until like, it's really hard for me to connect with animal spirit guides, but they come in as like animal forms, and so I just kind of treat them as that. And then I also have a cat, because I don't know, it just seems right. And so I started getting a lot of like cat signs. Cats are pretty frequent too, or pretty common, but I ended up buying like a little black cat statue made of like crystal. I think it's obsidian. It's either obsidian or jet. Oh no, I think it is obsidian because it's really dense. But I have one, and I bring her with me whenever I do tarot readings, and she just kind of hangs out with like people, spiritually, not physically. So she's really playful. I don't have a name for her, but she's very playful. Okay, so I am rambling on with spirit animals, but that was just how I worked with spirit animals. And you don't necessarily have to work with spirit animals this way. You don't even have to work with like the whole spectrum of the animal kingdom. It could just be 1 or 2 animals. Even insects. I know for me it's dragonflies, and then with dragonflies they connect with fairies. So there are people who also work with fairy spirits, fairies, fairy guides. I didn't mention that in here, but yes, you can also work with the fairy realm to do healing as well. But anyways, the next thing I have is Ascended Masters. It's kind of, working with Ascended Masters is similar to the Archangels, except that with the Ascended Masters, when they were alive, they had their own influence, spiritual influence. So it's taking their spiritual influence and knowing how to work with them in the certain situations that you're dealing with. Ascended Masters, again, were once humans living deep spiritual growth and influence, like Buddha, Jesus, Mother Mary, Guan Yin, and their purpose now is to guide and teach us through their spiritual influence. So you don't have to be like a devout follower of these Ascended Masters. You can utilize their teachings. Again, based on whatever it is that you need. Like my husband and I were not Buddhists, but we channel, or I channel a lot of Guan Yin energy when it comes to like me self-sabotaging, that I channel compassion and unconditional love. Um, and the same thing with like Mother Mary. I actually really connected with her through my graduate years, connecting with Mother Mary and the imagery of Mother Mary and the divine, like, nurturing mother. And in some ways, like, I channel that too. um, so Ascended Masters, and there's a bunch of Ascended Masters. It's not just limited to like masters who are associated with specific religious following. It could even be like deities or gods from different no, I shouldn't say deities or gods, because they serve a specific purpose too. Like, I wouldn't say that, for example, Hecate is is an ascended master. She is a goddess, and some people worship her for the work that she represents, the type of magic or spiritual work that she represents. Sorry, my dog was having a moment with her snot. So if you hear that in the background, that's her. So the next thing then, from Ascended Masters, is Guardian Angels. And Guardian Angels are exclusively devoted to helping just you. They are angels, or they are guides that are like the people who, or the guides that are assigned to you. And so I would say that my guide, who I call Rose, is a guardian angel, because she's always around. She's always around, and I always feel her presence. I always feel her presence, and she is an elder. I do feel like she's older, but she's the one that I connect the most with. She's the one that shows me like things. She's the one that I work with to do healing. So that's the guardian angel. And then helper angels, I would say, is more so kind of like Lisa. So there are also other, no, I would say Lisa is a guardian angel, because they have been a part of my life since I was young. Helper angels, they don't really like stick around. They are freelance angels, to speak, so to speak, who are just looking for humans to help with specific situations, like finding new friends or a new space. So if you're like, oh my gosh, universe, like, send me a sign, or oh my gosh, universe, send me like a new apartment. I'm currently looking for a new apartment. Helper angels bring that to you, and you don't have to know their names. You could just be like, hey, can somebody help me? But setting a very specific intention too. So that's what helper angels do. They assist your spiritual team too. And I use the word angels, but I think for me, they don't come as angels with like wings. They just come as spirits with a glow about them. They are emanating light. That's how I know they are my guides, and they're helping me rather than like random spirits who might not be compatible with me. Because in the Hmong culture too, there is a belief that some guides are just not compatible with you, and can, because of the conflicting like energies, or just that like you're not enmeshing well, or they're not enmeshing well with you, that it could be a lot of misdirected like guidance. And so I don't want to say it where it makes you feel like you have to be careful that you're connecting with the wrong guide. I think sometimes you just kind of know. But more than often, the ones that you do resonate with are going to be the ones that you are able to identify. But helper angels, or angels in general, when I talk about them, it's not necessarily like the angels in the way that we typically think of them in the Western culture, Western spirituality. I think of angels as just like beings who emanate light and help guide me to serve the purpose that I'm, meant to deal with. I just realized that I wasn't recording with my microphone, and so the audio for the first 34 minutes have been recorded without using my microphone, so it is a little bit lower on the volume side. But hopefully you can hear it. So I am going to continue talking about the different types of guides in this episode. The next one that I want to talk about is departed loved ones and ancestors. So for me, and I feel that it's because my husband and I, we are traditional, that I do feel the presence of ancestors and departed loved ones. They do come through to me a lot more frequently, and those are the guides that I tend to go to just because of my familiarity and my cultural upbringing. But and the same with my husband too. But departed loved ones and ancestors essentially and obviously are any humans who has passed on, who might become a spirit guide on your team. They help with sending you support in practical ways and nurturing relationships. And then for me, they show me things to be made aware of, like my example with that I shared before in earlier episodes about making me be aware of people who are still living, like what their current situation is. Departed loved ones and ancestors. I usually channel them when it is something that's specific culturally. And it's interesting because I only call on my side. I don't call on my husband's side. And I think it's just because like I was like not married until I was in my mid-20s. So there's a lot of time to be spending with like your ancestors. One of the first ancestors that I connected with, or departed loved ones I connected with, was the grandma who was a grandma for a relative who wasn't even like related by blood. It was just by clan and tribe or whatever. And that was the first person I connected with. And then since then there was ancestors like way back in the ancestral line to show me like the way, or show me like the old world. And then it came, and I think like my dad's dad came, but he doesn't really show up. I think it's just more so of like the presence, but not like the physicalness, the physical like being, the manifestation of like a being, even in visualization or meditation. But there was a nurturing like maternal figure, and I can't tell if it's like my dad's dad or if it's my mom's mom, but it does come through. And I don't really ask much from them. They're really stoic. I don't really ask anything from them. I know that with my husband's family, they have a practice in asking for ancestors' help, but again, because we we weren't raised with knowing how to ask our ancestors. I do feel like it's a cultural thing too. Like it's a very you can't do it for everything. Like it's not like you can pray for your ancestors' help. It's like you have to ask in a very specific way for a very specific thing. Like there's only some things that you can ask for help from your ancestors. And so departed loved ones, yeah, I don't have too many people who I have connected with. But other than visitations through like mediumship, but they're not really a constant. My constants are definitely like the archangels and the guides. But I think it's because of the specific rituals that you need to perform to ask from help from your ancestors. It's a very specific way. But when they do come, they come through in my dreams. And they do so that is intended to help out another family member in the extended family. So going back to like the nurturing relationships, I think that's why they come through. It's like, okay, this is a very important relationship and this person is very important to you. This is what's happening. No, I did. I had one experience where a departed loved one who I knew growing up did come to me in a dream. She was making aware of her husband, like in dire need of like emotional and mental support. And so I ended up calling my dad and I told him, because it was like my dad's first cousin, so they were basically like brothers growing up, that I had a dream of her and him coming to visit me on my deathbed. And you know my thing with like basements, right? So it was in a basement. And so I'm like, oh crap, I'm in a basement, like this shit is for real. And so I'm laying there, like I can feel my breath like getting more and more shallow and my body just being drained. Like I was being drained. And I was laying in this sleeping bed that was basically my deathbed. And they come down and they're like, you know, my uncle, he just kind of like looks at me, doesn't say anything. He's like, well, looks around and then he goes back upstairs. But then my aunt, who passed, by this point she passed, she came to me and she was like touching my hair and she was like brushing my hair, and she didn't say anything, but she smiled at me. She just smiled at me and her energy was just like nurturing and motherly, and I just kind of felt like it was okay. I felt like, okay, this is okay. And so I saw her go back upstairs, and when I woke up, I'm like, oh my gosh, something's like not right. Like, because I'm like, okay, basement check, deceased loved one check, living loved one check. And so I'm like, okay, I gotta call my parents. So I call my parents, I tell them what happened. And they asked me, oh, did you have this dream like this morning or yesterday night? And I said, well, when I woke up, it was light outside, but it was still pretty dark. And then my dad proceeds to tell me that he was really concerned about his brother, his first cousin, his brother, because he has been showing signs of like dementia or Alzheimer, forgetting things and just like repeating the same things, having the same conversations over and over. And he's only in his like late 50s, early 60s. And so my dad was just really concerned because they had to go over and do his suga, because my dad was just like really concerned for him. And so I was having this conversation with my dad, and I didn't even know that they were going to visit them. And you know, every time I tell them something, And it's like alarming. They're like, oh, don't think too much about it. I'm like, I'm not thinking too much about it. I'm telling you to make you be aware that this is happening. I'm like, I can let it go, you know, I can talk about it and just let it go. And it just ends up becoming like a story. I don't try to investigate things. I just, if there's a message that's coming through and there's people involved, I just go and tell them. I don't try to be like, oh, is this happening right now? You know, mostly it's just, I just want to let you know that, you know, so and so came through. But that was one of the times that, you know, a departed loved one came through. Okay, so next is how do you connect or communicate with your team? And for some people, they ask me that when I tell them I have guides. I think the other thing that they have to get over, a lot of people, they try to get over, is like just even having a spirit team or spirit guides, because it sounds very intimidating and scary for some people who are very like what is it, not skeptical, who have a small heart. That's how we that's what we call it, like 虾妹妹. But for people who have like a small heart, they when they ask me like, oh, you have guides, like they have to get over that before I can start talking about like how I connect and communicate with them. But for those who are like completely comfortable with like talking about guides and things, how I connect with them, or one of the ways that you can connect with them if you're wandering, are through your clairs. I talked about that in one of the episodes. Through your dreams, I also mentioned that. And sending signs and leaving actual items, sounds, or numbers. I think for people who work with angels, they're pretty familiar with numbers. But when it's applied to like symbols and signs from departed loved ones, it could be specific numbers that resonate with you. It could be sounds, like not like you're sitting in a room and all of a sudden you hear a sound, like a disembodied sound, but like say you're like talking, right? And all of a sudden there's like a ding coming from your phone and you're trying to make a point, and all of a sudden like your phone rings, right? That's a sign. Or leaving actual items, kind of like how I was talking about with the spirit animals. And an example of how your other guides work with each other is, say you're asking for a sign and then your guide leaves like a llama charm on the floor, right? really like unique placement, right? Or even like animal in itself. It's like, okay, so well, they're working with the animal spirit guides to send me this message, right? So say you try to ask for a specific message from like a departed loved one, and they show you like a llama. That's like the different guides working with each other. Just coins too, leaving coins. Coins are pretty obvious. And smells. So for me, with my guide Rose, it's obviously like the rose scent. And then sometimes with roses, coming across like roses or rose petals, and very like interesting like places. And yeah, so that's one example. Sometimes too, they connect to you by making events happen. And I can go a little bit into that, but how you connect or communicate with your team is they're mostly showing you. So if you ask, they're gonna show you. And sometimes they won't show you because they know that you already know what answer that you're looking for. So with events, right? With events, it could be events that had to result, that had results that eventually reveal as a message, lesson, or a revelation, or events that happen that prevent you from crossing paths with harm. That's how it manifests. Just through like happenings, happenings that happen, you know. It could even be like they trigger you to spontaneously pull into a McDonald's, and you're like, you know what, I'm not that hungry, but I'm gonna go into McDonald's just to get me a smoothie. And you go in to get, oh, so this is a real story, not a smoothie, but an example of events is that, for me, this happened recently, was that I was heading back home from work, and I really didn't have a reason to stop at a McDonald's. I was just like, oh man, I could really go for a soda, and I pass up a McDonald's on my way home. So I made the last minute decision to pull into a McDonald's. And I was like, even questioning myself. I'm like, Michael, you really are just going to go to McDonald's to grab a soda? Like, okay, whatever, like you're feeling this, like just go with it. So I go and I pull into the drive-thru. I just order my soda, and I'm pulling up to pay for my drink. I pay for it, and there's 2 cars ahead of me. I'm like waiting and waiting and waiting, and this is a McDonald's that does pretty well with orders. Like they get on it and then they go, and I'm waiting, and there's like a pickup truck in front of me, and then ahead of that pickup truck that's waiting for its food or whatever, I couldn't even see what was going on, was a red van. And it looked like they were just having a conversation with the person in the window, right? But I don't know what was being said. But I'm sitting there, and I'm just kind of like, okay, time's going to pass. Like, they'll get their food and it'll be done. 10 minutes later, I'm like, okay, this is really weird. Like, what's going on? I don't really typically experience this at this particular location. And this was like a Sunday or a Saturday at a very like non-busy hour. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, I never experienced this before. I'm like, okay, Michael, just be present. Maybe there's a reason for this. Maybe it's for the person in front of you. Maybe it's for the person behind you that this is happening. Maybe it's for you, Maybe you're being delayed because there's something in your path that you're not supposed to come across. I take it as that, right? I'm like, okay, you guys, I'm like by myself in my van. And I'm like, okay, you guys, I'm just going to listen to you. I'm just going to be patient with it. So I don't honk my horn or anything because I'm just like going through the motions of whatever the situation is unraveling. And the pickup truck in front of me has been patient too. I can tell he has been patient. And finally, he just kind of like taps his horn. And the moment he taps his horn, like the red van seems like they end their conversation and then they get all their stuff and they go, right? And so I'm like, were they just having a conversation and holding up the line for like no reason? Because once that van left, then traffic was flowing again. And at this drive-thru, and the whole time I was like, wow, like of all the days to order a soda, like this would happen. Because I have ordered, I typically go to this place to order like a Happy Meal for my son and I, and then I would just get like a different meal or whatever, right? So this was like the smallest order I have ever done at this location, and I've never had this experience before. And so I'm like, just thinking about it, like of all days, right? Of all days to experience this would happen. And try not to be ungrateful about it. But I'm like, you know what? It's okay. There's a reason for this. And you might not know now, but maybe it'll be revealed later on, right? Maybe there was something in your path that you're not supposed to come into contact with, because that was happening a lot that week, where events were happening that would prevent me from heading out to go to wherever I need to go, and coming to find out like something had happened in my path of going to where I needed to go. And it would be like very disastrous things that happened, right? So I finally get my soda. I'm like not even mad. I'm like, it's just $1. It's just soda. Just get it and go, right? And I go and I'm like happily driving, but then I'm also on alert because I'm like be careful. Maybe that was a sign for me to be careful and just be aware of the intersections that I would be crossing. And every time, and the thing was like, it was green light all the way, right? Green light all the way home. For most of them. I shouldn't say all of them. For most of them. And so I go through 2 big intersections that pass the freeway, and I'm just, every time I cross it, I just kind of like tap my brakes to just slow down, to be aware of like the other cars that are turning to cross me, right? So to pass me. And so I'm like being very careful, just driving at the speed limit, and I'm like, oh, about to turn into my neighborhood. I'm like, oh, I see the ambulance or the paramedics lights, and it's coming up the opposite side, up the ramp, but on the opposite side of where I am, and I see it off in the distance, and I'm like, oh, okay, the ambulance is going somewhere. And I'm turning into the street that goes into the neighborhood that I live in, and I'm turning in, and sure enough, that ambulance that I saw like a few yards away was turning into the neighborhood. I'm like, okay, this is really weird, because we never get any paramedics or ambulance come into our neighborhood unless it's like it is in the hours where everyone is home, right? Because we do have a lot of elderly people who live in our neighborhood. And so I'm like, okay, maybe it's for someone, like I'm just thinking like, oh, I hope that they're okay. And so I'm crossing paths with this ambulance, and up ahead, the street that I have to pass up, there's a bunch of debris and a bunch of people just standing on the sidewalks. Like everyone just starts coming out of the house, and this has again never happened before that I have seen. But I drive up close to it. I'm like, okay, do I let the ambulance pass, or like do I pass up the ambulance? Because at this point the ambulance had already parked, and I was coming up to the ambulance, and so I'm like, okay, I can't take another street anymore, because this is one of those long streets where there's no outlet street. And I'm thinking like, should I pass up this ambulance? I'm like, okay, no, my goo, just keep going, but just be slow. Just take your time and be slow, right? So I'm driving, and I come up to the site of why the ambulance is there. So in our city, there's been a lot of stolen cars that have been getting crashed into light poles and trees. And this is all because like kids who are just stealing cars and taking it for a joyride and wrecking them. And so we live by a high school, and on time during the day, when it's right around the time that they let out students, you hear kids like just driving recklessly through the neighborhood, right? And so I'm coming home, and I pass up this car that's completely totaled. All the airbags have been deployed. There's nobody in there, but the car is, the front end of the car is like bent, and the car essentially like hit a tree. And so what happened is that I think it was one of those situations where it was like a stolen car and the person took it for a joyride. But for the ambulance, for me to arrive there at the same time the ambulance arrived there, this meant that it probably happened like 10 or 15 minutes before I arrived, or 5 minutes, or whatever, right? So if I had came at the same time that if I hadn't gone to get my soda at the when I did, and I went home the regular time, like however it would have been, I probably would have come into contact with this car, and it probably wouldn't have been a good result. I would have probably been injured. And so I'm driving slow, and like I'm like, okay, what the hell? Like, oh my God. Like, I'm just like saying thank you, but also thinking like, I hope that the people are okay. Like, even though it was taken for a joyride, like those types of things are not okay. You still don't you wanted to stop, right? These like situations to stop, but you don't want to wish anyone death or harm, right? Who doesn't deserve it? Who doesn't deserve it? But I was like concerned too, because I'm like, these are kids, And so I go home and I'm just like cycling through it. I'm like, oh my God, that would have been like really bad. That would have been really, really bad. And I was just really thankful that, I stopped to get a freaking Coke, and that line was held up. But that's an example of like an event that your spiritual team might it results in an event, but the feeling was definitely sent from my spiritual team. The feeling of wanting to get a soda. Like, they were telling me like, hey, you need a soda right now. Like, just trust me, you need a soda. And so that's an example of like how it can manifest as an event, is listening to those intuitive like needs. Again, going back to like popular culture references, right? Remember when Harry Potter took that potion, that luck potion, and things just started working out intuitively, how things were just happening? That's how it was. That's how it feels like, where you don't have to force it, you just go with it. Happy go lucky, right? That's the definition of that phrase. And so that's an example of how your guides might connect with you, is that they connect you to through like these intuitive, spontaneous like things that might spur up for you. Like if you're feeling like you want something, or you're feeling like you just have to go with something, then go with it. And it might look like it is not working out, right? When I went and waited in the line, I was realizing how I was starting to become impatient, and I told myself, okay, chill out. This might just be like a lesson that you need to learn, or something that you're needing to cycle through right now. Whatever the interaction, whatever the outcome, just go with it. And going through with it, and then after the fact, like finding out like, oh, it's a good thing that I waited, that I didn't explode, because there was a bigger thing that was happening up ahead, right? So going through with those things intuitively, and I think it helps people to practice how to be more present and rely on their intuition. That's kind of what your guides help you to do too, because that's how they work through you, is through your intuition. I have another story about like intuition and how like my guides are sending me all these like crazy physical signs, and then in the end, like it was like, thank goodness. But I will save that for another day. My last thing that I want to talk about, well, it's not my last thing. One of the things is, how do you know when you are communicating with a guide? A lot of people are intimidated by this, working with their guides or their team, because they don't, for some of them, which is very valid, they don't know if they're connecting with their spiritual team or if they're connecting with like some rando like spirit entity, right? So for me, it's like having a conversation with someone. Like, I intentionally call on those guides that I have been able to identify. It's like calling your friend on the phone. Like, you know you're going to call your friend. You're not going to call some random person to go hang out with. You call your friend to go hang out with them because you know them, you trust them, and you have established some form of communication and relationship where there is an exchange, like it can be reciprocated, right? So for me, it's like that. And I joke with some people about how it's easier to talk to spirits than it is with humans. It's so very true. But other ways to tell if it isn't your guide is if they become increasingly threatening, right? When you're talking to someone and they're becoming increasingly threatening, what do? Like, you try to seek some form of protection. You try to like protect yourself, right? Or you try to like take yourself out of the situation. And when this is happening, you're feeling this by taking off the red flags too. When you're talking to someone, you're starting to get the sense like, oh, they're becoming more and more threatening. You're taking off the red flags, like, nope, raising their voice, nope, using like derogatory terms, nope, they're accusing me of something that I didn't do, or nope, they're telling me to do something that is not what I usually do, nope, they're telling me to like take advantage of someone. Then right? You're using your moral compass to identify if it is a guide or not. After that, then like you need to get out of there or call upon protection and avoid it. If you feel comfortable and it resonates with a sense of safety, then you know that it's your guide. Again, going back to like the friends, your best friend that you trust, right? The person who you trust the most. What does that feel like? And using that feeling or that emotion to help you gauge like what guide you are speaking with, or if it's a guide or not. Also take note of when you are aware and confident you are communicating with them. So when you're confident that you're communicating with a guide or with like someone who has passed, specifically like mediumship, and you feel confident like, oh no, they're good, and you have no reason to question that, then you know that it's a guide that you're speaking to, or someone who does not have malicious intent. And taking note of how you're feeling. Additionally, for me, if I feel like a burning sensation in my solar plexus and I'm experiencing something that seems trustworthy, but I come to find out what I'm experiencing is not what it seems, I realize it is my guides giving me clear sentient messages. Like, if I'm talking to someone and I'm being told, or the way that they're talking, they're like being nice, but they're slowly like pushing me to do something that I don't usually do, but they're kind of like giving me false hope or empty promises, and I up here I'm thinking like, oh well, they're being nice, and they're not being threatening, and like I know them this way, and I don't know them quite well, but they're being nice. But then I'm feeling like this burning sensation in my solar plexus, and I'm like, well, why is my intuition, because your solar plexus is where your intuition or your gut feeling sits, I start noticing that, then I start like checking in with myself. Like, okay, first of all, your solar plexus is on fire. Your gut feeling is on fire. What is this telling you? This person, like, listen to what this person is telling you. Listen to what they are asking from you. Is this something that you usually do? Is this something that you said you wouldn't do, but they're trying to work you? If it is something that is going outside of your comfort zone, but you're just saying yes because the feeling that you're getting from this person is that they're just nice, that, like, what do you do, right? Like, maybe reevaluate that and backtrack. It's okay to backtrack and be like, you know what, actually, I changed my mind. Like, I'm not going to do this because I already said this and this and this, So that's how I know that my guides are sending me signs. Like, I'm like, ooh, you're doing something that's not what you typically do. You already said you're not going to do this. Like, be consistent. Then I'm like, oh, you know what? No, never mind. It's almost like the person who is misleading you, they are creating an illusion, right? They're creating an illusion through their words. They're using their words to force you into things that you don't want to do. But their demeanor and their charisma is creating an illusion. My guides will invoke like physical sensations to break me from the illusion. It could even be a pain. Like, the person isn't sending you like any physical like harm or intentions of harm, but you're getting like drained. That's what the term like energy vampire comes from. You are getting like headaches from this person. That's an example of a psychic attack. Your guides start sending you like signs, and then sometimes those symptoms are because some people are sending you those things. But when you start noticing these things as you're talking to someone, like, take note of like, okay, what is this person really talking about? Like, is this serving me? And if it is, then maybe it's like, even if you're feeling all of this and the person, it seems like right, maybe you do have to deal with it. You do have to work with the person because you're gonna learn something from it. But I learned that when my solar plexus is burning, like it's on fire, like I'm actively doing like crunches, and I'm not doing them, and I don't do them. What are they trying to tell me? Right? So I think for another episode, I can talk a little bit about how you can connect with them more clearly. I think that's something in itself that some people might want to do, and you can do so in a safe way. And you really don't need to use any divination tools for connecting with your guides, but I think a lot of people assume that they need that. But I can use another episode to talk about that too. There's just so much within the spiritual world and spiritual healing that I can talk about, and so many different types of conversations that happen within these different concepts and topics. But I think I will do that. If this is where you are in your journey, my advice is to not have fear in terms of connecting with your spiritual team. If you already connect with a particular guide, use that guide as an access point. More than often, they're all working together, so you connect with one, and that one will be like the team leader, the captain of your spiritual team, to connect with everyone else. Be like, hey, let's get this going, right? If you already yeah, so if you already connect with a particular guide, then of course use that as an access point. But if you are not ready, it is okay too. Some people are not ready to go into that. And I know for some, it can be a little intimidating to navigate the spiritual world, but with practice and proper protection, it will make things a little easier, especially at your own pace when you are ready to go into it. And so that's what I wanted to share with you all, is just some information about your spiritual team or spiritual guides. Think of them as your spiritual liaisons or allies that are there to just hold your hand in your spiritual journey. They are meant to be helpful and not harmful, but of course, like, you still have to develop some trust in them, right? Some of us, we grow up doubting even our own abilities, and so they're always there. They're going to be patient. They're going to work with you. They will help you when you need it. Whether it be just a small request, they will be there. And so that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tune into the next episode where I have a special guest to come and talk about their spiritual journey, so you guys can have a break at listening to me talk about my spiritual journey. So thank you again. I will talk to you soon. And that concludes this episode of The Narrow Path in the Floating Mountains. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tune in for the next one coming out soon.
She calls me day and night. I'm sorry, girl, you just don't make me feel right.